Ever felt a moment so wrong yet so right? A feeling that makes your heart race and your mind scream for answers. But you're too afraid to face the truth? This is one of those stories. It was an ordinary evening, nothing out of the ordinary. The kind of evening where everything feels like it's in its right place. But sometimes, it's those very moments of calm that make you realize just how fragile things are. I was in the kitchen, finishing up dinner, when my son Lucas came in, back home for the weekend after months away at college. I'd always thought of him as my little boy, but the young man standing there now was different. More distant, more reserved. Still, when he smiled, I couldn't help but feel a rush of warmth. But something about that night, about the way Lucas looked at me, felt different. It was like the space between us had suddenly grown smaller. And yet, somehow farther apart. Little did I know, the evening was about to take a turn I could never have imagined. Dinner was a quiet affair, just the way we liked it. The faint smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen, mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread. It was the kind of evening where the world outside seemed to slow down, the soft hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock, becoming the soundtrack of our routine. I hadn't realized just how much I missed these small, peaceful moments until they were suddenly interrupted by something so subtle. It took me a while to notice. Lucas, my son, sat across from me at the table, eyes fixed on his plate, occasionally glancing up at me, then quickly averting his gaze when I looked back. He had always been a curious child, full of questions, always wanting to know more. But now, at 21, he had grown into a young man who didn't seem to need me as much. His answers were shorter, more guarded, and his smiles didn't come as easily as they used to. Still, I cherished our time together, even when the silence between us grew. I tried to convince myself that it was just the natural distance that comes with growing up. Yet there was something in the way he looked at me tonight that unsettled me. It wasn't anything overt, nothing I could pinpoint exactly, but there was a difference in his gaze. It wasn't just the familiar affection I'd seen in his eyes when he was younger. This was deeper, more intense. The way he watched me made my pulse quicken, but I quickly shook the thought away. I'm just being paranoid, I told myself. It must be my imagination. We talked about his friends, his classes, the usual chatter you make when trying to catch up after being apart for so long. But even in those casual conversations, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that something was off. His eyes kept returning to me even when I wasn't speaking. They lingered a little longer than usual, a little more searching. I tried not to let it bother me. We were family, after all. After dinner, we decided to watch a movie, something we used to do all the time when he was younger. The living room felt warm and inviting, with the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. The familiar comfort of our old routines was supposed to put me at ease, but instead, it only made the tension more palpable. The couch was big enough for both of us to sit comfortably, but tonight, Lucas sat closer to me than I was used to. At first, I thought it was just because there was no other space, but as the evening wore on, I began to feel his presence more and more. It wasn't anything overt, no words, no gestures that might have raised any real alarms, but it was in the way he seemed to be there in a way that was different from before. Every shift in his position, every glance in my direction, seemed to carry more weight than usual, and when his arm brushed against mine, it felt like electricity shot through me, sharp and unexpected. The sensation startled me, and I pulled my arm away almost immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice soft, almost too soft. I couldn't understand why his words felt heavier than they should. I wasn't sure how to respond. I swallowed hard, trying to dismiss the unease that was now swirling inside me. "Yeah, just tired," I lied, offering him a smile I hoped was convincing. But even as I spoke, I knew I wasn't fooling myself. Something had shifted. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there. This unspoken tension that made the air between us feel thick, charged. It was as if the familiar boundaries of mother and son had become less clear. We continued watching the movie, but neither of us seemed to be paying attention to it anymore. The words on the screen were just background noise now, drowned out by the pounding of my heart in my ears. And as the movie carried on, I found myself looking at him more than I should have. Not just in the way a mother looks at her child, but in a way that felt foreign, curious, almost intense. Every time I glanced at his face, I saw a man, not the little boy I remembered. And then it happened again. Another touch, another accidental graze of skin. This time he didn't pull away. Instead, his hand lingered just a moment longer before he slowly retracted it, almost as if he were waiting for me to say something. My breath hitched. My mind screamed no, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on me, suffocating me in ways I hadn't expected. "Mom?" he asked again, his voice low, full of concern. It was the way he said it, the way his voice broke through the thick silence of the room that made my chest tighten. My heart was racing, my palms sweating. "You okay?" I couldn't explain it. I didn't know how to explain it. But there was something happening between us, something I wasn't ready to face. The space that had always existed between mother and son, the one that kept us safe from any kind of misunderstanding, from crossing any boundaries, was suddenly gone. It had been replaced by something new, something unsettling, something I wasn't sure how to navigate. I forced a smile, trying to convince both of us that everything was fine. But deep down, I knew that this was no ordinary evening. The air had changed, and with it, everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Lucas seemed to be unraveling, thread by thread. The night continued, but neither of us could focus on the movie. We sat there in silence, the kind of silence that feels too loud. I was hyper-aware of him, of the way his body was positioned so close to mine, of the way his gaze lingered whenever our eyes met. It was a feeling I couldn't explain, a line between mother and son that felt like it had blurred in the strangest way. Later, I told him I needed to go to bed. As I walked to my room, I felt this weight on my chest. Something was happening, and I didn't know how to stop it, or even if I should. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Lucas was up first, sitting at the kitchen table, as if nothing had happened. He smiled at me, and I smiled back. Maybe it was just a weird moment, nothing more. But deep down, I knew that something had changed between us, something I couldn't ignore. We decided to go for a walk that afternoon, something we used to do often when he was younger. The air was crisp, the sun shining, and for a moment, it felt like everything was just the way it used to be. We talked about simple things, old memories, his future plans, and how much he had changed since his last visit. I was starting to feel like I had overreacted to the night before. But as we walked further, the silence between us became heavier. It wasn't just the quiet of nature around us, it was the kind of silence that makes your stomach twist, the kind that makes you aware of every small movement. When we reached a clearing, Lucas stopped and turned to me. "I've always been there for you," he said, his voice low and serious. "I don't know what I'd do without you." There was something in his voice that made me pause. Something raw, something deeper than a son's affection. I forced a smile. "Well, you won't have to worry about that, Lucas. I'm not going anywhere." But Lucas didn't smile. Instead, he stepped closer. "It's always been more than that," he said, looking at me with an intensity I couldn't place. "You've been everything to me." A chill ran through me. The words hung in the air, charged with an emotion I wasn't prepared for. I looked into his eyes, searching for any sign that this was just a phase, that maybe he didn't mean it in the way it sounded. But his gaze didn't waver, and suddenly my heart was racing again. "Lucas," I whispered, barely able to speak. "You know I love you, right?" "More of course," he said, his voice soft but filled with an unspoken intensity. He was so close now, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body. "I love you too, more than you think." My mind screamed for me to step back, to stop this from going any further, but my body felt frozen in place. What was happening? This wasn't how things were supposed to be. I took a step back, my voice trembling. "We need to go back," I said, my words barely above a whisper. "It's getting late." Before I could walk away, Lucas reached out and took my hand. His touch was gentle, but his grip lingered, and I felt every nerve in my body react. "I can't explain it, Mom," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "But I've been feeling something I shouldn't, and I think you feel it too." Panic set in. My heart raced in my chest as I quickly pulled my hand back. This couldn't be happening. "Lucas, stop," I said, my voice rising. "You're confused." His eyes searched mine, a mix of pain and confusion clouding his expression. "I'm not confused," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I know how I feel." My chest tightened. I knew I had to stop this, but I didn't know how. "This isn't right." "Lucas, sir," I said, shaking my head. "We can't..." But my words were cut short. The weight of what we were both feeling hung between us, thick and suffocating. "I know," he whispered, his voice full of sorrow. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help it, and I don't think you can either." Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had to be strong. "We can't," I said again, my voice breaking. "Please, we can't." Lucas looked down, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. What had just happened? I felt like I was suffocating. We drove back home in silence. The weight of what had been said hung in the air, making each minute stretch longer than the last. I didn't know what to say to him, or to myself. I just needed to make sense of everything, but I couldn't. When we arrived home, Lucas disappeared into his room without a word. I collapsed onto the couch, my hands shaking, my mind racing. What had happened to the relationship I thought we shared? How had it come to this? Later that night, I heard a knock on my door. My heart sank. I knew it was him. "Mom, can I come in?" His voice was soft, unsure. I wanted to say no. I wanted to create some distance, to pretend like everything was normal. But I couldn't do that. I needed answers. I sat up on the bed, covering myself with the sheets, as if they could somehow protect me from this storm. Lucas entered, his face filled with uncertainty, and he sat on the edge of the bed. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I shouldn't have said what I said. "I don't know what happened to me." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. "I know this is confusing," I said, my voice trembling, "but we can't let this go any further, Lucas. It's not right. We have to be careful." "I know," he replied, looking down. "It's just so hard." The next morning, Lucas packed his things to return to college. The silence between us was thick, filled with unresolved emotions we couldn't even begin to process. When he left, the house felt emptier than ever. The relationship between a mother and son is meant to be simple, pure. But somehow, we had crossed a line neither of us knew how to handle. As the days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about what had happened. We were both trying to move forward, but something had changed forever, and I didn't know if we could ever go back. In the end, I spent a lot of time reflecting and trying to understand the turmoil inside me. For so long, I had seen Lucas only as a child. He was the most precious part of my life. I carried every moment, every emotion of his in my heart. But that night, something changed. I don't know exactly what happened, but the deep tension I felt never went away. After the night, I wanted to believe that Lucas's feelings for me were just some kind of misunderstanding, something that didn't really mean anything. As a mother, my love for him should never have changed. But at the same time, the bond between us was no longer as pure and innocent as it once was. And so I had to bury those feelings deep inside, hoping to push them out of my mind. The next morning, on our walk together, I still couldn't fully understand the silence between us. Sometimes, the closer people are, the farther apart they drift. For years, I never questioned my love for him, or the bond we shared. But that night, those looks, those touches, they made me realize that something had shifted between us. Back at home, during our usual morning routine, everything seemed normal at first. But when I looked at Lucas over breakfast, I could feel the tension. We didn't seem as familiar to each other anymore. The bond that had always been so natural was now clouded by something unspoken. I had to admit that we were no longer the same. But life doesn't always go the way we want. Over time, everything changes, and people change. Lucas's love for me will always hold a special place. But there was an emptiness inside me. I had no idea how to fill that void, how to reconcile my feelings for him, how to define my role as his mother in the face of these overwhelming emotions. It was all more complicated than I had ever imagined. In the end, returning to the peaceful days we once had together wasn't going to be possible. As much as I longed for it, everything had changed. Our bond would have to evolve into something new. But how? I still hadn't figured that out. Every night, I went to bed wondering if there was a way to move forward. I thought about him constantly, even though I wasn't sure of what he was as well. My love for him, as his mother, was undeniable, and yet something